The metal groans. The Sherman's engine vibrates beneath your feet. And then you hear it. A different sound, sharp, cutting, coming from the tree line ahead. It's not the German MG-42, that electric saw rip every American soldier learned to fear. It's something else. Deeper, slower, and strangely familiar. Sergeant Eddie Kowalski freezes for a second inside the tank's turret, his hand still on the coaxial machine gun control, and whispers through the intercom. That's one of our 50s. Nobody responds, because they all heard it. And they all know what it means. The Germans are using captured American weapons. But what none of them realizes yet is that this sound, this enemy miscalculation, is about to become the biggest tactical advantage Charlie Company will have over the next 3 weeks of combat in Belgium. And before this story ends, that sound will save lives, cost lives, and change the way an entire armored regiment thinks about listening to the battlefield. December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge just exploded over American lines like a storm of steel and snow. Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 33rd Armored Regiment, 3rd Armored Division, is conducting an orderly withdrawal through the forests south of Liège, covering the retreat of disorganized infantry units and trying to avoid complete encirclement. The roads are narrow, icy, treacherous. Every mile feels like 10. Every hour feels like a day. The cold is brutal, the kind that seeps through steel and wool and skin and settles into your bones. Kowalski commands the Sherman M4A3 nicknamed Rust Bucket, not ironically but because the tank genuinely looks ready to fall apart at any moment. The paint is chipped, the tracks are worn, the engine coughs and sputters every time Hale shifts gears. But it runs. And in December 1944, in the middle of the largest German offensive on the Western Front since D-Day, a tank that runs is worth its weight in gold. The crew consists of 5 men who've been together since Normandy. Kowalski, the tank commander, 26 years old, born in Detroit, worked 3 years in an auto parts factory before being drafted. He's no hero, not a natural leader, but he's got an absurdly good ear. Since childhood, he could identify a car's make and model just by the engine sound. His old man used to test him on street corners, pointing at passing vehicles, and Eddie would close his eyes and call them out. Ford Flathead, Chevy Straight 6, Chrysler Inline 8. On the front, that skill became survival. He distinguishes a Panzer IV from a Tiger by the rumble of their tracks, recognizes a cannon's caliber by its report, knows when an enemy engine is overheating or when a transmission is failing. The other men in the crew joke about it sometimes, call him radar or bat, but they also trust it. They've seen it work too many times to doubt it. Corporal Jimmy Hale is the driver, 22 years old, from a small town in Kentucky, used to drive tractors on his family's tobacco farm. He's got steady hands and nerves like iron. When shells are landing and the world is exploding around them, Hale just keeps driving, jaw set, eyes forward. Private First Class Marcus Tully is the gunner, 24, from Philadelphia. Worked as a machinist before the war. He's precise, methodical, doesn't waste shots. Private Vincent Rizzo is the loader, 19, from Brooklyn, talks too much when he's nervous, which is most of the time, but he's fast and he never fumbles around. And Private Dale Kern is the radio operator, 21, from a suburb of Chicago. Quiet, bookish, wanted to be a teacher before the draft board had other ideas. 5 men inside 30 tons of metal, rolling down icy roads under constant fire, never knowing if the next bend will reveal a panther or tiger waiting in ambush. Eddie Kowalski is 26 years old, born in Detroit, worked 3 years in an auto parts factory before being drafted. He's no hero, not a natural leader, but he's got an absurdly good ear. Since childhood, he could identify a car's make and model just by the engine sound. On the front, that skill became survival. He distinguishes a Panzer IV from a Tiger by the rumble of their tracks, recognizes a cannon's caliber by its report, knows when an enemy engine is overheating or when a transmission is failing. And now, on this freezing December afternoon, he's just heard something that shouldn't exist. A Browning M250 caliber machine gun, firing from the German side of the line. The ambush happens on a secondary road, flanked by snow-covered fir trees. 3 Shermans from Charlie Company advance in column, with 50-yard intervals between each vehicle. Rust Bucket is in the middle. Up front, Lieutenant Grayson's tank, a newer model with better armor and a functioning heater. Behind, Sergeant Pollack's tank, older than Rust Bucket, held together with spit and prayers. Visibility is terrible. Snow falls thin and steady, not the heavy flakes that might provide some cover, but the fine wind-driven kind that stings your face and makes everything look gray and flat and featureless. The radio crackles with confused orders, reports of enemy contact in all sectors. Requests for air support nobody knows will arrive. The weather's too bad for planes. Has been for days. And then, without warning, the burst. It doesn't come from ahead. It comes from the left, from behind a rise covered with frozen brush. The sound is unmistakable. Tac, 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 tac. Rate of fire 120 rounds per minute, deep, heavy. Kowalski shouts into the intercom. 50 cal. Position 10 o'clock. They've got one of our guns. Tully's already traversing the turret. Hale brakes hard, nearly throwing Rizzo inside the fighting compartment. The second burst hits Rust Bucket's side, sparks flying off the hull, but no penetration. The rounds are big, powerful, but they're hitting at a shallow angle and the Sherman's armor, thin as it is, holds. And then the sound changes. The cadence becomes irregular. Tac, 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 silence, jam. Kowalski doesn't hesitate. Move up, now, 10 o'clock, 200 yards, German half-track with a 50 mounted. Hale accelerates. The Sherman groans, slips in the snow, gains traction. The engine roars. The tracks churn. Tully already has the target in his sight. The German half-track, and CDAKOIF Zias 241, is partially exposed, with two desperate Wehrmacht soldiers trying to clear the Browning machine gun mounted, improvised on a bracket welded hastily to the vehicle's side. The weapon is crooked. The feed belt is tangled. One of the Germans yanks the charging handle hard, but nothing happens. The other shouts something Kowalski doesn't understand, but he recognizes the tone. Panic. Pure animal panic. The kind that comes when you realize you've made a fatal mistake and there's no time left to fix it. Tully fires. The 75mm round goes through the half-track side to side. The explosion is brief, dry, fatal. When the smoke clears, there's nothing left but twisted metal and silence. No movement. No survivors. Grayson's voice crackles over the radio. Good kill, Rust Bucket. Keep moving. We're not stopping here. And they don't. Because stopping in the open, in the middle of an ambush zone, is suicide. The column rolls forward, past the burning wreckage of the half-track, past the bodies sprawled in the snow, past the Browning machine gun lying on its side, half buried in slush and mud. Kowalski gets a good look at it as they pass. The barrel is bent. The feed tray is open. The belt is twisted and torn. It's a mess. A complete disaster. And he thinks they had no idea what they were doing. That night, the company loggers in a clearing protected by an infantry line. The tankers dismount, stretch their legs, try to get some feeling back into their frozen feet. There's no hot food. The supply trucks are somewhere behind them, maybe cut off, maybe destroyed. Nobody knows. They eat cold K-rations and drink water from canteens that taste like metal and diesel. Kowalski gathers his crew around an improvised fire made from wet branches and diesel fuel. The flames are weak, smoky, but they provide a little warmth. Everyone's exhausted. Rizzo has a cut on his forehead, result of a hard break 2 days earlier when they nearly drove into a crater. Kern can't stop shaking, not from cold, but from accumulated adrenaline. Hale smokes in silence, staring at nothing, his face gaunt and hollow in the firelight. Tully cleans the cannon with movements that are mechanical, almost ritualistic, the same motions he's performed 1,000 times. And Kowalski speaks, slowly, choosing his words carefully. They're using our weapons. I don't know where they got them, probably from captured depots or destroyed vehicles. But they don't know how to use them right. That 50 jammed because the belt was poorly seated, or because they used wrong ammo, or because they didn't lubricate it. Doesn't matter. What matters is that when we hear that sound, we know 2 things. First, there's Germans nearby. Second, they're about to have a problem. Rizzo looks up, wiping blood from his forehead with a dirty rag. So what? We just listen for our own guns and then move in? Kowalski nods. Exactly. They think they're getting an advantage using our weapons. Higher rate of fire, bigger punch. But they don't have the training. They don't have the manuals. They don't have the right oil, the right ammo, the right parts. So the guns fail, and when they fail, the Germans are exposed. Vulnerable. Tully stops cleaning the cannon and looks at Kowalski. You think this is gonna keep happening? Kowalski shrugs. I don't know, but if it does, we need to be ready. We need to listen, and we need to move fast when we hear it. Over the following days, the pattern repeats. On 3 different occasions, Charlie Company makes contact with German units that mounted captured American machine guns on their vehicles. In one case, it's a 30 caliber Browning M1919 fixed to the side of a Panzer IV. The tank is hull down behind a low ridge, only the turret visible, and the machine gun is mounted on a crude bracket welded to the turret side. The German gunner opens fire on a squad of American infantry moving through a field. The sound is distinctive. That slower, heavier rhythm of the .30 caliber, so different from the MG42's buzzsaw scream. The weapon fires half a dozen rounds and jams. The German gunner tries to clear it, standing half exposed on the turret, and that's when Pollack's gunner puts a round right through the Panzer's turret ring. The tank brews up, flames shooting from the hatches, and nobody gets out. In another case, it's a German half-track with two 50s mounted on dual brackets, clearly ripped from a destroyed American vehicle, maybe a half-track or a gun truck. The weapons are mounted side by side, pointing forward, and when the half-track comes around a bend in the road, the gunner opens up with both barrels. The sound is incredible, deafening, a wall of noise, but the cadence is chaotic, uncoordinated. One of the guns overheats in less than 20 seconds and stops functioning, smoke pouring from the barrel. The other continues, but the German gunner doesn't know how to control the recoil, and the rounds go high, uselessly, tearing through tree branches and empty air. Grayson orders suppressive fire and the infantry advances, eliminating the enemy crew before they can abandon the vehicle. When the Americans inspect the wreckage afterward, they find the 50s are in terrible condition. No oil, rust on the moving parts. The feed belts are mismatched, some links American, some German, some improvised from God knows what. It's a miracle the guns fired at all. Kowalski starts taking notes. In a hardcover notebook he carries in his uniform pocket, the kind you can buy at any PX for a nickel, he records each occurrence, date, approximate time, weapon type, German vehicle type, nature of failure. He writes in pencil, small cramped letters, filling page after page. He doesn't know exactly why he's doing this. Maybe it's the factory worker instinct, accustomed to production reports and quality control. Maybe it's just a way to maintain sanity, to transform chaos into data, into something comprehensible, something that makes sense. But the notebook becomes a reference. Grayson asks to see it one evening, flips through the pages, nods slowly. "This is good work, Sergeant. Real good work. Mind if I show this to the captain?" Kowalski shrugs. "Go ahead, sir." The captain looks at it. Then someone from battalion, then someone from regiment. And the information moves up the chain, copied and recopied, typed up on mimeograph machines, distributed to intelligence officers who add it to their files and briefings. What nobody in Charlie Company knows yet is that on the other side of the line the Germans are also taking notes. Field reports begin circulating among Wehrmacht and SS armored unit commanders. Captured American machine gun, caliber .50, mounted on Panzer IV, jam after 15 rounds. Cause unknown. Weapon abandoned. American machine gun caliber .30, installed on SDKF Z251, overheating and barrel rupture after prolonged use. Crew casualties from barrel explosion. American ammunition incompatible with feed rate, causing repeated failures. Recommend discontinuation of captured weapon use. The reports are technical, cold, written in the dry bureaucratic language of military paperwork. But between the lines there's frustration, there's anger. Because the idea seemed good, use captured enemy armament, save German ammunition, increase rate of fire, give the troops a psychological boost. Look, we're using their own guns against them, but the execution is a disaster. Browning machine guns were designed to function with specific lubrication, with American standard ammunition, with regular maintenance and proper training. The Germans have none of that. They improvise mounts, adapt feed belts, mix ammunition from different lots, ignore cleaning procedures because nobody taught them the procedures in the first place. And the weapons fail. Always. Sometimes spectacularly. By mid-January 1945, the German offensive has stalled. The weather clears enough for Allied air power to return, and the Luftwaffe is nowhere to be seen. American reinforcements pour into the salient fresh divisions with full fuel tanks and ammunition stocks. The Germans begin to withdraw, slowly at first, then faster as the American counterattack gains momentum. Charlie Company is involved in a limited counterattack operation south of Bastogne. The objective is to retake a small village that changed hands 3 times in the last 2 weeks. A miserable collection of stone houses and barns, most of them reduced to rubble, but it sits on a crossroads and whoever controls it controls the road network. German resistance is fierce. There are at least 2 Panthers in the area, plus entrenched infantry and camouflaged anti-tank guns. The advance is slow, costly. Every corner could hide death. Every window could shelter a Panzerfaust. The infantry moves building to building, room to room, throwing grenades, firing bursts from their Thompsons and bars, dragging wounded men back through the snow. And then, mid-afternoon, while Rust Bucket advances down a narrow street between destroyed houses, Kowalski hears it again. Tac, 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 tac. 50 caliber. coming from above. He looks up through the partially open hatch and sees. Atop a Panther parked behind a barricade of rubble, there's a Browning M2 machine gun mounted on the turret, on an improvised bracket that looks like it was welded in a hurry, probably by a field maintenance crew working with whatever scrap metal they could find. A German soldier is behind the weapon, firing short bursts toward American infantry advancing down the parallel street. The sound echoes off the ruined buildings, amplified, distorted. Kowalski can hear the strain in the gun's mechanism, the slight hesitation between rounds that means something's not right. Kowalski doesn't think. He reacts. Panther, 12 o'clock, 100 yards. He's got a 50 on top. Tully's already adjusting the sight, but before he can fire, the German machine gun jams. The sound stops abruptly. The German soldier pulls the charging handle. Nothing. He hits the weapon's side with his gloved hand. Nothing. He looks down, shouting something into the Panther's turret, his voice high and panicked, and in that moment, in that brief interval of 3, maybe 4 seconds, Tully fires. The round hits the base of the Panther's turret, doesn't penetrate, the armor's too thick, but the impact is enough to tear off the improvised machine gun mount. The Browning falls, tumbles off the tank, hits the ground with a metallic crash that Kowalski can hear even over the engine noise. The German soldier disappears inside the turret. The Panther begins reversing, slowly, tracks grinding over rubble, trying to back into cover. But Grayson, in the lead tank, is already in flanking position, coming up a side street. He fires. This time the shot penetrates, hitting the Panther's side armor at a 90-degree angle. The tank stops. Black smoke begins pouring from the ventilation grills. The engine coughs, sputters, dies. The hatch opens. 2 men emerge, staggering, hands raised, faces black with soot. American infantry rushes forward, rifles raised, shouting orders. The Germans drop to their knees, hands behind their heads. They're young, terrifyingly young. One of them can't be more than 17. Later, during interrogation of the prisoners, one of the Panther crewmen, a young Unteroffizier no more than 20 years old, with a thin mustache and hollow eyes, explains through an interpreter that the machine gun was mounted by direct order of the company commander. The idea was to use the weapon to suppress enemy infantry during urban advances, since the Panther's coaxial machine gun had limited firing angle and couldn't depress low enough to hit targets in basements or ground floor windows. But nobody in the crew really knew how to operate the Browning. They'd seen Americans using it, thought it was simple. Pull the trigger and fire. They didn't know you had to adjust the headspace, check belt tension, use specific lubricant. They didn't know the gun needed to be cleaned after every few hundred rounds, that the barrel needed to be changed after sustained fire, that the ammunition needed to be stored properly to prevent corrosion. The weapon jammed on the third burst. And it cost them the tank. The Unteroffizier says this quietly, without emotion, staring at the floor. He looks exhausted, defeated, like he's been expecting this moment for a long time. The information reaches battalion command, then regiment, then division, and eventually, through intelligence channels, to higher echelons. Captured reports from German units confirm what Charlie Company has been seeing. There's an informal order, not written, but widely disseminated, for tank and armored vehicle crews to avoid using captured American machine guns. The order isn't official, it doesn't appear in doctrine documents or training manuals. But it's there, in conversations between commanders, in platoon briefings, in warnings passed word of mouth. Don't use the American weapons. They fail. They expose us. They kill us. Some units ignore the warning. Some commanders, desperate for any advantage, any edge, continue to mount captured weapons on their vehicles. But more and more, the practice stops. The Germans learn. The hard way. For Kowalski and the Rust Bucket crew, this becomes an unexpected tactical advantage. They learn to listen, to distinguish, to anticipate. When the sound of a Browning echoes from the German side, they know there's a vulnerable target nearby. There's an enemy who made a mistake. There's a window of opportunity. And they exploit it. In February, during a reconnaissance patrol near the Roer River, they identify an SDKFZ 234. A German armored reconnaissance vehicle, 8-wheeled, fast, lightly armored, equipped with a .30 caliber mounted on the turret. The vehicle is moving along a ridgeline, silhouetted against the gray sky. The machine gun opens fire on an American observation post. The sound carries across the valley, clear and distinct. The weapon fires half a dozen shots and jams. Kowalski orders pursuit. Hale accelerates, pushing the Sherman hard, the engine screaming. The SDKFZ tries to flee, racing down the reverse slope, but it's lighter, less armored, and the muddy ground slows it down. Tully fires a burst from the coaxial machine gun, puncturing the rear wheels. The German vehicle slews sideways, tips, nearly rolls. The crew bails out, running. American infantry cuts them off. They surrender without a fight. In March, already on the east bank of the Rhine, the war feels different. The Germans are collapsing. Entire units are surrendering without firing a shot. But there are still pockets of resistance, still fanatics and SS diehards who fight to the last round. Charlie Company faces a final organized resistance from a mixed Wehrmacht unit dug in around a small town. Among the German vehicles, there's a Panzer IV with a .50 caliber mounted almost artisanally on the turret, using leather straps and barbed wire as fastening. It looks insane, like something a child would build. The weapon fires, jams, fires again, jams again. Kowalski laughs, a short laugh, bitter, without joy. They still haven't learned. Grayson over the radio responds, "Then let's teach them." The Panzer IV is destroyed in less than a minute, hit 3 times by 3 different Shermans. It doesn't even try to run. But not everything is victory, not everything is tactical advantage, because war doesn't work that way. War is chaos and randomness and bad luck, and being in the wrong place at the wrong second. In April, during an advance through Thuringia, the landscape green and rolling and almost peaceful-looking, Rust Bucket is hit by a Panzerfaust fired from a basement window. The projectile penetrates the hull's side, below the turret, right where the armor is thinnest. The explosion is deafening, blinding. The interior of the tank fills with smoke and flame and the smell of burning metal and burning flesh. Rizzo is killed instantly, torn apart by the blast. Kern loses his left hand, severed cleanly at the wrist by a piece of shrapnel. Hale suffers second-degree burns on his face and arms, his skin blistered and blackened. Tully and Kowalski manage to get out, dragging Kern and Hale through the hatch, their hands slipping on blood and oil. Rizzo stays inside. They can't reach him. The fire is too intense. The heat is unbearable, like standing in front of an open furnace. And when the ammunition starts cooking off, rounds exploding in the racks, they retreat, helpless, watching Rust Bucket consumed by flames. The tank burns for hours. By the time the fire dies down, there's nothing left but a blackened shell. Kowalski never commands a tank again. He's transferred to administrative duties, spends the rest of the war at a supply depot in Kassel, processing casualty reports and parts requisitions. He sits at a desk in a cold warehouse, typing forms, filing papers, listening to the distant rumble of artillery. He hates it. Hates the boredom, the uselessness, the feeling of being sidelined while the war continues without him. But he also knows he's lucky. He's alive. He's whole. He didn't burn. Hale is evacuated to a hospital in England, then repatriated to the United States. He survives but never fully recovers vision in his right eye. The burns heal, but they leave scars, thick and ropey, across his cheek and neck. He goes back to Kentucky, back to the farm, but he can't drive the tractor anymore. His hands shake too much. He ends up working in a feed store, selling seed and fertilizer, and he never talks about the war. Not to his wife, not to his kids, not to anyone. Kern also returns home, with a prosthetic replacing his left hand, a crude metal hook that he learns to use with surprising dexterity. He spends the rest of his life working in an accounting office in Chicago, adding columns of numbers, filing tax returns, living quietly. He never marries, never has kids. He lives alone in a small apartment, and every night he dreams about fire. Tully remains in Europe, is promoted to sergeant, participates in the occupation of Germany. He's stationed in Frankfurt, then Munich, then Berlin. He sees the camps, he sees the ruins, he sees what the war did to Europe, to Germany, to everyone. And when he finally returns to the United States in 1946, he's thin, silent, different. He goes back to Philadelphia, back to the machine shop, but he can't focus. He quits after 6 months and drifts from job to job, city to city, never staying anywhere long. Kowalski's notebook, with its notes about captured machine guns and mechanical failures, ends up archived in some army depot, along with thousands of other war documents. It sits in a cardboard box in a warehouse in Maryland, gathering dust. Nobody publishes a study about it. Nobody writes an article. There's no medal, no recognition, no mention in official reports. But the information circulated. The lesson was learned. And somewhere in some post-war tactical intelligence manual, there's a footnote, brief and discreet, about the importance of understanding not just the enemy's capabilities, but also their limitations, their mistakes, their unsuccessful improvisations, about how sometimes the enemy's attempt to gain an advantage becomes their greatest weakness, about how listening, really listening, can save your life. Because war is this. Not just force against force, but error against error, improvisation against improvisation, failure against failure. And sometimes victory doesn't come from a brilliant plan or a superior weapon. It comes from listening, from paying attention, from recognizing the sound of a machine gun jamming on the other side of the line and knowing in that instant that the enemy just made a fatal mistake. Eddie Kowalski knew that. His crew knew that. And they paid the price for that knowledge, as everyone pays in war, with blood, with pain, with loss. Rizzo paid with his life. Kern paid with his hand. Hale paid with his face, his eye, his peace of mind. Tully paid with something harder to define, something internal, something that broke and never healed. And Kowalski paid with the memory, the weight of command, the knowledge that he sent men into fire and some of them didn't come back. But they also left something behind. A lesson. An echo. The sound of a Browning jamming. And the certainty that in that moment, someone on the other side was about to die. That sound became a signal, a warning, an opportunity. And for a few weeks in the winter of 1944 and 45, it gave Charlie Company an edge. A small edge, maybe. But in war, small edges are the difference between living and dying. Between going home and staying in a grave in Belgium or Germany or France. Between remembering and being forgotten. Years later, in 1953, Kowalski receives a letter from Tully. It's short, just a few lines, written in shaky handwriting on cheap paper. Tully says he's living in California now. Working construction, doing okay. He says he thinks about the crew sometimes, about Rizzo, about that day in April. He says he still hears the sound of the .50 caliber jamming, hears it in his dreams, and every time he hears it he wakes up sweating. He asks if Kowalski hears it too. Kowalski writes back. He says yes, he hears it, he'll always hear it. And maybe that's okay, maybe that's the price of survival. You carry the sounds with you, the good ones and the bad ones. The ones that saved you and the ones that killed your friends. You carry them all. In 1968, Kowalski dies of a heart attack in his home in Detroit. He's 50 years old. His wife finds him in his chair, the newspaper still in his lap. At the funeral there are no military honors, no flag-draped coffin, no rifle salute. Just family and a few friends and a brief service. Hale doesn't attend. He's too sick to travel. Kern sends flowers. Tully doesn't respond to the notification. Maybe he never got it. Maybe he did and couldn't face it. Nobody knows. And the notebook, the one with all the notes about captured weapons and jammed machine guns, is never found. Maybe it's still in that warehouse in Maryland. Maybe it was thrown out decades ago, tossed in an incinerator with 1,000 other forgotten documents. Maybe it doesn't matter. Because the lesson survived. The knowledge survived. And somewhere, in the collective memory of the men who fought in Europe in 1944 and 45, there's a story about listening to the battlefield, about recognizing the sound of enemy mistakes, about turning the enemy's arrogance into your advantage. It's not a famous story. It's not in the history books, but it's real, and it mattered. To the men who lived it, to the men who died because of it, to the men who survived because of it. If stories about crews who learned to exploit enemy mistakes in the chaos of World War II grab your attention, consider subscribing to the channel, hitting that like button, and commenting what other kind of improvisation or tactical failure you'd like to hear about here. There are hundreds of these stories, buried in archives and memories, waiting to be told. Stories about men who improvised, who adapted, who listened, who survived, and stories about men who didn't.